I am really excited to welcome you to this, I think, really exciting and interesting topic today that is really geared to address questions that you might have, whether you are a trainee or a faculty member, about sort of the very practical aspects of running a research program. We've put together a really terrific panel. I want to thank Stuart for organizing this on behalf of the Center for Clinical and Translational Science. Thanks for being here. Please jump in and participate, and please send us feedback afterwards to help us know how it went. We're always looking to improve our programming. Thank you and enjoy your morning.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, so today's program hope to give you some good tips and practical tools to help you with getting a team in place and managing your research budgets and managing your research collaborations. And to start with, we have a panel to talk about hiring your research team with Valerie Wright, who's a lab manager in the Department of Internal Medicine in the College of Medicine, and Jill Raphael Fortney, who is a professor in the Department of Physiology and Cell Biology in the College of Medicine, to give you their insights from their long experience of working in research and in putting together teams in various lab settings. So let me turn it over to you, Valerie and Jill, and I don't know if you've worked out in advance who will talk first, but this is basically just kind of discussion back and forth, talking about their experiences, and want you then all to jump in with questions that you have on this topic.
I guess I can start. We touched base briefly yesterday to figure out what time it was, and I actually had 9:10 on my calendar, but anyway. So I would say the most important thing is to think about your expectations ahead of time. And if possible, I have a one-page expectation sheet that I use for that I give to everyone who interviews in my lab, from sort of beginning, sophomore undergraduate through, full-time staff or postdocs, because it just lays out what my expectations are and gives them an idea of whether the job might be a good fit for them. It certainly helps the most for, the more junior people who've maybe never had a full-time job before or never worked in a lab before, but even for more senior people, it lays out how my expectations might be different from someone else's expectations. So, I would say that's the first starting point of good lab management. And to be able to hire people who are a good fit for what you're expecting, because everyone has expectations. I don't think that anyone is completely flexible and has no expectations, and it's just better to be, to really think about what yours are and be really clear about them, when you're interviewing people, when you're hiring people. I think that helps a lot with the back end of dealing with problems. I think before I did that, I'd have people, saying, why are you leaving at 2 PM? What is going on? And they said, oh, you never told me that you wanted me to be here within a core hour period, or not work in the middle of the night, or or not play video games in the middle of the day. So, just really having sort of your list of expectations and lab rules, I think is a good way to start. Valerie, you're muted.
Sorry. Jill shared that with me. I haven't started using it yet, but I've read it, and I think it is definitely a wonderful tool. You'll get undergrads who come in and don't have a clue what's going to be expected of them, let alone when are they expected to be there? How are they allowed to study? Are they not allowed to study? Things like that.
You're muted again. Are you still?
There we go. Sorry, technology this morning. So my side of where we're coming from, the reason I sit on the panel is I get to see it from the end user side. I'm in the lab every day with these other people. And it's hard when you've got a student who walks in and doesn't know what they're supposed to be. So task lists are another thing that are very helpful for me when trying to give these, especially new people, getting them up and running. What am I supposed to be doing? Well, here's my list. Let's check this list off, make sure everything here is done before I go hunting for Val or Jill to say, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Well, did you look at your list? Because we've got things to do too.
It's really hard talking to a bunch of boxes if anyone wants to turn their camera on and ask any questions. And we don't know what you want to hear about. We've never done this online before, only in person.
Yeah.
Well, how do you structure your interviews when you're bringing someone in for an interview? Like, you use behavioral interview questions, or what kind of approach do you take?
I mean, science interviews are a little different than sort of other job interviews, I would say, because I mean, the first thing that you really want to do is talk to well, I do go over my expectation sheet, but then I really talk to the person interviewing about the science and see if it excites them and see if they have good questions, because if they seem bored or they don't think it's cool the first time hearing about it, they're not going to be engaged for very long, and they're just going to come in because it's a job, and they're not really ever going to go the extra mile. So, I mean, I think the number one thing is to sort of share some data, and depending on the level, if it's an undergrad, maybe just sort of a 10-minute, really big picture overview with a couple of techniques involved that they might, that you can walk through, that they can understand the data. If it's a postdoc, obviously, a whole hour, go through everything that's going on and what projects will be. But you really want to see that the person's excited about it, because I mean, if someone's just not excited about it, they'd rather not be there, and I'd rather them not be there. I want everyone to, be interested in what they're doing, or you're just not going to get very much out of anyone who's working for you. And preferably that they ask good questions. I mean, even, I just took a new sophomore into the lab. I always have undergraduates, and I highly recommend, if you're at a research university, to incorporate undergraduates in your research. They're cheap. It's a really inexpensive way to get a lot of basic tasks done, and many of them go on to really function at the level of a graduate student. I'd say at least half of them function on projects that are equivalent to what graduate students do, or mid-level graduate students do, and half of them remain just doing simple tasks like prepping DNA or running PCR or tagging and tailing mice. But it saves your full-time expensive people from doing those jobs. And there are a lot of summer fellowships at OSU that can support them full-time during the summer. Most of them will work for credit during the school year. Sometimes I'll pay them senior year when they're really doing high-level research, data collection for papers. But they're usually willing to take a couple of 4998 independent study questions and come to lab 10 hours a week and tag and tail mice and learn how to dissect. And so it is a really efficient way to do that. But you want to make sure that they're excited about it, and that they have good questions. So even at a sophomore level, I interviewed a couple of sophomores this fall, And I mean, they had amazing questions. Like they had clearly read papers from the lab before they came in. They asked, you know, really high level questions. So, you know, I think those are some of the things. I have to say that and when I interview staff, I do have, you know, like a new technician, I do have sort of a list of, you know, questions about, you know, how do you deal with disappointment? You know, how do you, if an experiment fails, how do you deal with that? And, but honestly, I have not found the random questions to be all that insightful in knowing what people's strengths and weaknesses are later. So I just try to, you know, talk to them about their experiences and what they've done and why they want to do this job. You know, and I do tend to ask them, you know, if they figure, because we deal with a lot of samples, you know, if they noticed that a sample was out of place and they had missed something, what would they do? How would they handle that situation? Because I want them to be honest. I want someone who's actually going to come tell us that they missed a sample. But that's about the only, you know, real kind of interviewee question that I ask most people, except for maybe a full-time, you know, new research assistant sort of level who doesn't have a lot of research experience.
Jill covered pretty much everything that I would do. At my level and in our lab, I'm mostly responsible for undergrads. And again, undergrads are typically inexpensive. A lot of them, like Jill said, are willing to work for credit hours, or they're hoping to get that letter of recommendation that says, yes, this person is ready to go on to the next level of their education, whether it be their PhD, their MD, or whatever they want to go for. Same with what Jill said, students who come in asking questions, asking, am I going to get to do this? So showing me that they want to learn, want to move on, and be an active and productive member of the lab are important things that we would look for. I get to interview graduate students, and part of that is to make sure that they'll fit within the lab dynamic. If you get a student who comes in and says, this is the way I know it's got to be, or I don't have a good example, but you just get the vibe that, yeah, I don't know if you're going to fit right. Those are one of the things that we'll look for. I have not in the past found a student that didn't fit. I've also, in recruiting students to our lab, we ask our current students if they've got a student that they think would work well. And for me, that's actually worked out quite well with a couple of the students we've gotten. They're their friends, but they see them outside of class, so they know they're dynamic. They know, are they passionate about what they're doing, and do they want to move on? So yeah, that's kind of where I get to do with the interview process. The questions are the same kind. If we get answers that you could just tell they're excited in their answer, they're excited that they want to be there. Those are the kinds of students that we look for too.
And I would say, just to, I think I sort of skipped this point in the expectations and sort of interviewing people, is that I think I also ran one of the large cross-campus graduate programs at OSU. So I dealt with all the graduate students who couldn't find fits in lab. And I think that, you know, the one expectation that you really need to clarify, you know, in your own mind is whether you are a micromanager or not, and be really clear that, you know, if you're not I am not a micromanager. I can't stand to write lists for people of what to do today, but there are other people who, you know, do that, and that's how they like to work. So you need to figure out which you are and find people who like that style, because someone who wants to be micromanaged will never thrive in my lab, and vice versa. You know, if someone doesn't like to be micromanaged and they go to a lab where someone with the the PI micromanages, that is the worst fit, I would say. So I think you have to be careful about that. I think someone just asked a question in the chat. In an ideal world, what is the best mix of undergraduate students, graduate students, research coordinators, behavioral, clinical? What is the best way to build, who to start with, and when to add more? That is a very personal choice, I'd say. I have always kept my lab small. I mean, even when I had sort of 3 large grants at once, rather than hiring all those people to work in my lab. I mean, it was a lot of collaborative work. So I actually paid for people in my collaborators' labs out of that money, because I like to have 4 to 5 full-time people, and then I usually have 6 to 7 undergraduates with that. I just like to be able to really mentor my graduate students, really be there for them. I mean, as it is, I'm kind of busy with other things, and leading big projects and centers and a training grant. And so as it is, I have, lots of meetings and other responsibilities, but I like to be available for my graduate students. I mean, I spent most of my day yesterday reading through and editing my graduate student's F31 application that he's putting in a few weeks, and I like to go through multiple rounds of editing so they actually learn how to write, not just fix it for them and it's done. So we go back, we've gone back and forth 4 or 5 times, so that now he actually knows how to write. and writing the first paper will be much easier, and writing future fellowships will be easier. I would say, I mean, I love having graduate students and undergraduates in the lab. They always bring new energy and excitement. It's why I came to OSU. I mean, when I was deciding between jobs, it was actually between here and the NIH. And scientifically, they sort of would have been very similar for me as far as collaborations and resources and whatever. But I really came here to have graduate students and undergraduates in the lab, because there's just always fresh energy when you get new students in the lab. I've had staff, I've had 2 research associates over the past, I've been here 22 years, and the first one worked for me for 10 years and then left when she had a second child. And the second one has been in my lab for about 8.5 years now. So, I think I'm a good boss and retain people for a long period of time. I do like having, one staff person, because there are always things that come up that I don't feel are totally appropriate for a student. If a collaborator needs mice sent, or a collaborator needs a quick experiment done, or slides cut, or I don't want to pull a graduate, I don't want to say, oh, add this to your list of your thesis stuff. I mean, sometimes that is appropriate, because it gives them if it's something really straightforward that's going to lead to a co-authorship paper, yes, it's worth a graduate student to spend a week or a month of their time if they get a co-authorship out of it. But if it's just sort of shipping mice or cutting sections, it's not worth their time. So I think, one staff member is really nice. And especially with all the workday transition crap, I'll call it, excuse my positivity about that. But I mean, the administrative stuff is taking more and more time. So, it's nice to have someone to do that. Staff are expensive. I mean, they're more expensive because of benefits than graduate students, and certainly than undergraduates. So, I think you need to balance, and they don't turn over. So if you have someone great, well, they don't always, I mean, they can leave in 2 years, or they can stay forever. But they're also, you can't get rid of someone who's not good. It's really hard. So keep that in mind. Whereas, I mean, graduate students do turn over, and undergrads do turn over every couple of years. So, you're always getting sort of fresh ideas. Liz, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. So this is so valuable to me, and I think presume to others as well. This is just the stuff they don't teach us, right, in our PhD programs. And I'm wondering, like, just these kind of logistic questions are so helpful because they're so important because, like you said, that they take so much time, right? So, do you meet with your full team once a week, every other week? Who leads those meetings? Do you have an agenda? Like, because again, all those things take time when you want to focus on writing or
Right.
manuscripts and so forth. So that management part, how do you do that?
Okay, so I will tell you a very interesting story of why I have weekly lab meetings, and occasionally I skip them if I'll cancel it if something important. They're Friday mornings, and they're always Friday mornings. So if someone does have classes, I do not rearrange them every semester. If people, it's just whoever, most people can make that time, and one student can, and I'll try to catch up with them in the afternoon. But I think it's really important to have a weekly meeting with the whole team. And I'll tell you two reasons for that. One is just really simple, that if something's not working, so we do very bench science, you will occasionally get a bad tube of Tac polymerase. It just happens every year or two. There's a bad batch of enzyme, that got left out on a shelf somewhere. And so if everyone goes around the table and says, my PCR didn't work this week, my PCR didn't work this week, my PCR didn't work this week, you're like, it's a bad batch of Tac. And you don't have 5 different people thinking they did something wrong, trying it 10 times to try to get it worked out. You can easily pick up
Did everyone lose Jill?
We've lost her just for a moment. Let's see if she comes back.
Did someone say something? Oh, sorry, my internet connect. Can you hear me? It's on my.
Yeah, you're back again.
Okay, sorry. So you can pick up things that are, pieces of equipment that are broken, no one's tail's digested. It's like, oh, is the water bath broken? You can pick up things like that really quickly without 5 different people wasting time troubleshooting things. So that's the first reason. The second reason is more complex. So when I was a graduate student, Frances Collins was actually still a faculty member in my department at Michigan, and had just become NHGRI director before he was NIH director. So he was going back and forth between two institutions and still had a lab and graduate students at Michigan. And they had formal lab meetings so I just have informal lab meetings where we go around the table and say, what did you do this week? And I think that's useful because then everyone sees, oh, wow, that person got a lot done this week. I should pick up my game a little bit. So I think that's, you get a feel for if everyone's getting a decent amount done, and there's a little bit of peer pressure about getting stuff done, which I think is good for the team. But the big reason I have unstructured lab meetings, I've grown up in places that did both ways. And the structured lab meetings, especially if it's a bigger lab. So Francis used to have structured lab meetings where you presented, he had, 30 people in his lab. And so you presented every 8 or 9 months. And one of my classmates who was an MD PhD student got a blot that he thought he had cloned one of the leukemia translocation breakpoints, but it was one blot, but it was his turn to present this formal lab meeting when he hadn't presented for 9 months. So he showed the blot and said, I cloned the translocation breakpoint. And the whole lab got really excited about it, and they started planning the Cell and Nature papers, and he repeated the blot. and it was like a mark from the X-ray processor and was not a band and could never reproduce it. They published 8, so he could never, there was so much pressure from the whole team of 30 people getting excited about that they cloned a leukemia translocation breakpoint that he could never walk it back. And they wound up publishing 8 papers of fake data that had to be retracted. And Michigan charged him with grand larceny because his MD PhD was worth over $100,000, and that constitutes grand larceny. And he, so I will never have formal lab meetings where you only present every few months, because I think it brings out undue pressure and some people can't take it. And so I lived through that. And so anyway, that's why I have weekly informal lab meetings for three reasons.
So the labs, I'm currently in 2 labs. One lab has, in the past, not so much right now, would do a weekly meeting, and it would be a journal club or recent data. I've been in multiple labs, and that's one of the ways that you can run it. The other lab I'm in, although it's once a week, but you break it down. There's actual lab business, which sometimes, as in Jill's case, that's when you can get everybody to know this machine is broken. Has anybody troubleshooted it? Or we're running low on this supply. Make sure everybody knows what's coming up. Make sure everybody's training. If training has to be done, that's the time you get it done. Things that you can get done quickly once a week by having short parts of that lab meeting. Then the lab meeting, it's a set time. The lab meeting then moves to this person's data this week or this group's data. So I'm with Jill. You've got to have everybody presenting on a timely basis and often enough so that you don't spend 9 months waiting to find out that what I did 9 months ago was wrong. And now I've got 9 months of data that is wasted. That's wasting the student's time. It's wasting your time and resources, and you don't want to do that. But yeah, that's how our lab meetings work. I really like informal ones. They move faster, and just like any of these meetings, you sit in a lab meeting and you've had enough. You guys are on, faculty and staff are in meetings all week. Students are in classes all week. So you want to keep your lab meeting moving and engaging everybody. And I think when you're doing data troubleshooting, that's one way to keep everybody contributing to the pot.
I also, I just want to add one thing, a pandemic, I guess, related thing, is that I also, more than I used to, at the beginning of lab meeting, I say how I've spent my week because I do spend my week. I mean, in the past 2 weeks, so people have not been able to reach me every day because I've spent 2 entire days on 10-hour-a-day NIH study sections, and I've spent 2 entire days locked in the Nationwide Children's boardroom interviewing pediatric chair candidates. So, but I say that like, oh, this week I spent all of Wednesday interviewing, that's what I was doing. And I spent Thursday and Friday on study sections. So they know what I'm doing too, because especially as we're working remotely, maybe more than we did. I see a lot of people home, and I'm going to campus for an in-person meeting later today, but, back and forth. I think it's important that the people in our lab know that we're not just, drinking coffee with our friends or something. I don't know. I think it's nice that they have some idea of what we're doing, or I'm planning big grants, or I'm, I met with this group to talk about this large collaborative project, or, they have some idea of sort of what we're doing too.
In that same vein, if as a PI, you're comfortable giving your staff a heads up on when you're going to be around. I've worked for a clinician who's on service now. it's helpful for us to know when they're on service. So if they don't get back to us, we know it's because they can't, not because they didn't get the message. But if they're rounding with patients, they don't have time to say, where's, answer, where did we put the, I don't know, PBS. But being able to give your staff, it doesn't have to be a detailed where you're going to be, but when are you going to be around? Or if you know you're not going to be available, let them know when you won't be available so they don't get frustrated when they can't find you.
Other questions?
Liz, did you have another question?
I do. I don't intend to monopolize, but this is just really great. And obviously something that I think about a lot as I'm growing my team. I'm wondering if you talk a bit about, do you have, or how do you have your maybe graduate students helping you to mentor undergraduate students? I have graduate research assistants, and I have them helping me mentor undergraduate honors students. Help, have the graduate, I asked the graduate student to have them, watch as you enter the data in REDCap. They're city trained, the undergrad is on the IRB and so forth. But how do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I do that a lot. I actually, when I have graduate students rotate, I list that as something they'll learn in my lab, because I think, anything they want to do after that, they'll need to know how to train people and mentor people, regardless of whether they want to go into industry or government or academia. And they love that, they love that opportunity. So I usually wait till they're past candidacy, or I'll ask them, like, do you want to be involved, or you think it's too much? And, my student's doing candidacy in a few months, and she's like, oh, it's too much. But my other student who passed candidacy is like, oh yeah, I want to take on more. I love training students. So yeah, I do manage that. And again, by the weekly go around the table lab meeting, I can see whether it's going well or I need to get involved a little bit. And the undergraduates, I tend to meet with, separately also, not nearly as often as the graduate students, but, when I do have most of the undergraduates write summer fellowships, because even if they don't get it, then they really understand what their project's going to be to work full time over the summer. And they are 10 times more efficient when they've actually read the paper that their stuff is based on and put a little effort. It's a 2-page fellowship. It doesn't really take them that long, but it really helps their engagement. So to develop that each summer, I meet with them and we talk about it and I read it. So I think that's a really good interaction with them. And then that helps me later write letters for them, because I've, experienced their thought process, and I can say we worked on this fellowship together and they had this great idea, or, whatever, they were, whatever. It just helps with doing that. But yeah, I think it's a great experience for graduate students. And it helps you provide feedback to the graduate students. I mean, I just had a graduate student graduate who was probably the brightest. I mean, he was an amazing graduate student. My entire new R1 is based off of projects that he started and pushed for. And I mean, brilliant guy, terrible personnel management. And so I did have him manage undergrads, and I would give him feedback. I'm like, okay, so in this situation, when you got frustrated, here's what you could have done differently. And I kept emphasizing to him, I mean, he just got a job straight into industry, not at the postdoc level, and I knew that's what he wanted to do. And kept saying, like, in industry, you are going to have to manage big teams of people. You need to get good at this, because no one's going to pay you a lot of money for being good at pipetting or coming up just with the ideas. They're going to pay you to manage large groups of people. That's how you're going to get promoted. And really kept emphasizing that and explaining and correcting interacting. So I think it's a, it's a great opportunity, great mentoring opportunity for your graduate students and postdocs and even staff, whoever wants to. And it takes some of the burden off of you because you don't want every undergraduate running to you saying, where's the PBS or which pipette do I use? Or, I think it's really useful.
And it's the see one, do one, teach one aspect. It also re-ingrains in their minds to make sure they know what they're doing, because they have to stop and think. If I'm telling somebody, giving them direction, I've got to make sure I've got it right in my head before I give it to them. So it's also reinforcing that education that, that they're learning.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jill.
I will say one thing though, the one problem I have never solved is that when you do that, which I think is a good thing, but remember telephone when you were 5 years old and you went around the table?
Make sure it's also written down.
but there is always protocol drift. I have never actually solve protocol drift. And so actually yesterday I was in the lab, I was training a new rotation student a little bit and saw that just one of our basic procedures the undergrads were doing just inefficiently, not incorrectly, but I'm like, why are you taking these out of the centrifuge one at a time? I'm like, all right, let me show you how I do. So, I mean, there's just protocol drift that every now and then it is good to, be hands-on. And I'd say because of the pandemic and working remotely, and actually we moved from a lab for 20 years, my office was within the lab, so I could hear what was going on. And if someone was saying something that didn't quite make sense, and I would, I always worked at home maybe 1 or 2 days a week on writing, but days I was there, I would, be listening and say, no, you don't, that's a silly idea. But now my office, I'm in BRT and my office is not within earshot of the lab. And because of the pandemic, I have more meetings on Zoom. So I do think it's important to occasionally embed yourself. I mean, probably the right amount of time is once a month or once every 2 months, just bring your laptop into where everyone's working and work on something and kind of listen and watch and see if things have drifted and try to correct the drift a little bit. Because I don't know how to solve protocol drift, even though we have really detailed written protocols, don't know how to solve protocol drift. If anyone has any suggestions, I'd love to know them.
There's a couple of questions in the chat box and they've been sitting there for a little while. Dana, is our labs typically operating 24 hours a day? And do students, researchers meet virtually? I don't know. I would not say they typically work 24 hours a day. I'm sure there are labs that do. I don't know if labs in the, you'll find lights on in the BRT 24 hours a day, but sometimes it's an occasional, somebody's got to be here overnight. It's not, I would not call it a typical thing. It's not unheard of though. And yes, students, and at least in my experience, students and researchers are meeting virtually now more than that we did before COVID, but they are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was, I guess I was a faculty here for 4 years, three years before pre-tenure. I had my first child. And so, for myself, I was not in lab nights and weekends. I mean, I had to go pick up kids from, an early age, and that doesn't stop for a really long time for anyone with small children. It actually gets worse when they get into middle school and high school and have sports, and you have to pick them up at crazy times in random places. So that aspect of it actually gets more time consuming and more unscheduled, but yet you have to pick them up, but it's not, like daycare of the same time every day. So for a long time, because my daughter is not quite yet driving yet, so I'm still doing it, 18 years later. I am not in lab after 5 or 6 o'clock. And I rarely come in on the weekends, even pre-pandemic. And I tell my people that I just want them, you know, on my list of expectations is being productive and being efficient. You know, if you're efficient, you can get all your work done in 40 to 50 hours a week. You don't have to work 80 if you're, I mean, I'm just super efficient. And I try to teach people in my lab to be efficient. You know, while for experiments or, you know, writing, you know, if they have writing to do and they have experiments to do, you know, during your 2-hour incubation, outline your paper, you know, write your methods, do, you know, even things that maybe you need more focus for some of the writing at home, but you can write your methods, you can look up the product numbers. And
Jill just froze again. I was hoping she'd make it back. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, my home internet is actually usually good, which is up now. It says unstable again.
Yeah.
Usually home is good and BRT is terrible. So I stayed home.
I'm in BRT.
Okay. Yesterday I was on a meeting in BRT and it was going in and out. Sorry, usually home is good.
That's fine.
Forgot what I was talking about. Oh, efficiency. So I mean, I think you can, did you hear the writing part? So I mean, if you have writing to do, you know, during a 2-hour incubation, you can write your methods, you can outline a paper, you can look up the reagent product numbers and companies that have to go in the methods sections. You know, there are things you can do that you can keep moving along and be efficient. And the other thing I list in expectations is being productive. So being productive is not being busy. You know, I think you know, one of my expectations is not that you're busy all the time and look like you're doing something, but that you have the right controls, you've figured out your dilutions, you've thought through the plan, you know, that experiments you're doing are actually productive and not just, oh, I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try, you know, it's like be productive. So I don't think you need to, you know, I rarely work over 50 hours a week. I mean, in my whole career, you know, I get what I need done in 50 hours a week most of the time. I mean, there are exceptions when there are multiple grant deadlines and teaching and whatever, but I mean, in general, you know, I can work 45 or 50 hours a week and be productive. And I, you know, I tell my lab that, you know, you too can work, you know, however, if you want to, you know, take long lunch breaks and whatever, and you're here 60 or 70 hours a week, that's your choice, but you don't have to be. That's not my expectation.
And then there was one more in the chat. I run a dry lab. Do you have any advice on products that undergrad students could reasonably help to move forward, especially for new faculty?
I mean, I guess you'd have to tell me a little bit more about the dry lab. If you're doing coding sorts of things, I mean, you can hire computer science students. I you know people do bioinformatics kind of dry labs and hire computer science students to do coding, or bioengineering students. Do you want to tell us a little bit? I guess I need more context to be able to give you advice. Who is that? Does that person want to get on? Denise?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the context of my research, I do cancer focused research. I do community engaged research. I did just start in August. However, I'm teaching also. So when it comes to products, like, of course, there are grants that I'm looking to apply for, but reasonably, what's something that an undergrad could take on when it comes to even grant writing, or even new manuscript ideas, things like that.
I mean, you can have them look up the background. You can have them try to do some reading. You know, they can at least collect papers for you if you want to have them do PubMed searches and collect papers and maybe write little summaries of what, you know, if you can give them some, you know, if you can break it down into chunks potentially, or to look up protocols or papers with protocols that you can, I mean, that's harder, right? Grant writing sort of stuff, I guess, is harder to break down for an undergraduate, but not impossible. You know, you can at least have them, you know, look up different protocols for something that you might want to do. You know, you can have them collect data, collate data. If there's, you know, if there's some databases that you want to collect, you know, public health data from, you know, is that something that they can do and put in a spreadsheet for you? Or you can, you know, are there computer science majors who could search databases and write programs to crank out the type of data you would need for your research? You know, I'm not exactly sure if you, but I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you separately if you want to, you know, share more information with me and I can help. But it's really coming up with like little chunks of things that you can have someone do. But I think, you know, you need to think through what you want to do and what those chunks are and whether you can make them manageable for an undergraduate. But especially if you're teaching a lot, that means you have a lot of access to students and you can say, hey, if anyone wants to help with my research, you know, these are some of the opportunities, and you will probably get students willing to do that.
We have just a couple of minutes left. I did want to ask one question about if you're just starting out, maybe you've got your first R01, you know, you're first hiring lab staff. What do you think is the best move, like to hire a postdoc, a graduate student, a lab technician?
I will say that getting good postdocs in Columbus, Ohio is not very easy. So, you know, even the best labs do not you know, typically have fantastic postdocs. So, you know, although, you know, if you worked in New York or California prior to this and you were a great postdoc in a great big lab, I mean, we don't have mountains and we don't have the ocean and we're not a super big city, and recruiting great postdocs to Columbus. I mean, we are lowish on postdocs. Clinical fellows, yes, if you have a more clinical research, I mean, that's much less of an issue, but research kind of postdocs, there's not a large number, and lots of things have been done to try to recruit. So I would say don't set your sights on, you know, hiring a postdoc first. Like if someone falls into your lap, great. But if you put an ad out, you get a lot of, you know, a lot of applications from wholly unqualified people. Has been most faculty's experience. So yeah, I would say, you know, a staff person, a graduate student, you know, is probably a technician, and I would never hire a super senior technician as my first person. Because number one, that means they've probably been through a bunch of labs. Number two, they're probably set in their ways. And as a new person starting a new lab, you really want things done your way. So, you know, and they're expensive. So, you know, if you could hire someone as sort of a research assistant too, who maybe did undergraduate research or worked for a year or two somewhere else and relocating to Columbus for whatever, you know, I think that's a good way to start. I do, you know, you can't hold anyone to anything. It's not a contract, but I do usually try to ask for a 2-year commitment. You really don't want someone who's just going to work for a year, but, you know, saying, oh, I want you to work for 5 years is also not realistic. You know, if you ask for a 2-year commitment, a lot of those people wind up staying for a really long period of time. It means they're not just doing it as a 1-year gap year fill and going to med school the next year. And, both of the people that I've had long-term, I asked for a 2-year commitment. They're like, okay, I think, 2 years seems reasonable. And then we're there for 10 and 8.5 so far. So it's, I think that's a good way to start. And then, to try to let graduate students rotate and get a good graduate student that, because they're going to have more of the ideas and be in grant writing courses, and the technician can kind of do the things, can do the experiments that you would do that you don't have time for. And then the graduate student can sort of do more creative things potentially.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us and providing your insights. And thank you for the invitation to have people ask you further questions if they have them.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Oh, there's one more. The author. Do we have time to answer the authorship question? Yeah. So authorship is also sort of explained in my 1-page expectations sheet, which I guess is also nice to clarify for people, but I determine authorship by the amount of work put into the project and the amount of ownership. So there can be a technician. I did have a technician who only blindly quantified histological data. But she never took ownership of a project. So even though she did a lot of work for a lot of papers, I mean, she will never be a first author of a paper because she never planned the experiment. Someone would say, oh, stain these 20 slides and quantify them, but she, never came up with the ideas. So the person who sort of leads the project, takes ownership of the project is first author. I'm a big fan of co-first author papers. If it's, we just published a paper that had 3 first authors because there were really 3 people doing different aspects of it that were all crucial to the project. I've been co-first authors. I've also been co-last authors is something. So if you're in a collaboration with another lab that you're both really needed to get a paper done, being co-senior or co-corresponding authors it also counts. It counts for your tenure, it counts for their tenure. It's another, good thing. Oh yeah, someone said their authorship kind. Yes.
We'll talk some more about managing authorship and other collaborations later on. Well, thank you very much, Jill and Valerie.
Welcome.
You're welcome. Okay.